Hello everyone. My name is John Sierra and I'm a Tolkien scholar, and I am here to answer your questions about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, whether it's The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, or The Silmarillion, or any of his other works, or, just the man in general. And of course we have plenty of questions to get through from the past week, a total of, I believe, 18 questions this time. And of course, as I like to start now, we're going to keep this tradition going and do a brief reading from one of Tolkien's books, and this time I have chosen The Two Towers, which is the second volume of The Lord of the Rings. And I'm coming to the chapter, The Voice of Saruman. I think that's where we're going to read from. That's what I've chosen, because it's one that I come back to very often, and in speaking about, especially in regards to the authority and power of Gandalf the White in this scene, because it's a very brief chapter. It's really just a scene. It starts here, like page 181, and ends on 192. So it's an 11-page chapter, rather short. But it is Gandalf's confrontation with Saruman. I'm going to read you the latter portion of it. Can't really read the whole conversation, because then that would be basically the entire chapter. So here we go. Saruman, said Gandalf, still laughing. Saruman, you missed your path in life. You should have been the king's jester and earned your bread, and stripes, too, by mimicking his counselors. Ha! Me, he paused, getting the better of his mirth. Understand one another. I fear I am beyond your comprehension. But you, Saruman, I understand now too well. I keep a clearer memory of your arguments and deeds than you suppose. When last I visited you, you were the jailer of Mordor, and there I was to be sent. Nay, the guest who escaped from the roof will think twice before he comes back in by the door. Nay, I do not think I will come up, but listen, Saruman, for the last time. Will you not come down? Isengard has proven less strong than your hope and fancy make it. So may other things in which you still have trust. Would it not be well to leave it for a while, to turn to new things, perhaps? Think well, Saruman, will you not come down? A shadow passed over Saruman's face, then it went deathly white. Before he could conceal it, they saw through the mask of anguish, a mind in doubt, loathing to stay, and dreading to leave its refuge. For a second he hesitated, and no one breathed. Then he spoke, and his voice was shrill and cold. Pride and hate were conquering him. Will I come down? He mocked. Does an unarmed man come down to speak with robbers out of doors? I can hear you well enough here. I am no fool, and I do not trust you, Gandalf. They do not stand openly on my stairs, but I know where the wild wood demons are lurking at your command. The treacherous are ever distrustful, answered Gandalf warily. But you need not fear for your skin. I do not wish to kill you or hurt you, as you would know if you really understood me. And I have the power to protect you. I am giving you a last chance. You can leave Orthanc, free if you choose. That sounds well, sneered Saruman. Very much in the matter of Gandalf the Grey, so condescending and so very kind. I do not doubt that you would find Orthanc commodious, and my departure convenient. But why should I wish to leave? And what do you mean by free? There are conditions, I presume. Reasons for leaving you can see from your window, answered Gandalf. Others will occur to your thought. Your servants are destroyed and scattered. Your neighbors you have made your enemies, and you have cheated your new master, or tried to do so. When his eye turns hither, it will be the red eye of wrath. But when I say free, I mean free. Free from bond, of chain or command, to go where you will, even to Mordor, Saruman, if you desire. But you will first surrender to me the key of Orthanc and your staff. They will be pledges of your conduct to be returned later if you merit them. Saruman's face grew livid, twisted with rage, and a red light was kindled in his eyes. He laughed wildly. Later, he cried, and his voice rose to a scream. Later? Yes, when you also have the keys of Barad-dûr itself, I suppose, and the crowns of 7 kings and the rods of the 5 wizards, and have purchased yourself a pair of boots many sizes larger than those that you wear now. A modest plan, hardly one in which my help is needed. I have other things to do. Do not be a fool. If you wish to treat with me while you have a chance, go away and come back when you are sober. And leave behind those cutthroats and small ragtag that dangle at your tail. Good day. He turned and left the balcony. "Come back, Saruman," said Gandalf in a commanding voice. To the amazement of others, Saruman turned again, and as if dragged against his wheel, he came slowly back to the iron rail, leaning on it, breathing hard. His face was lined and shrunken. His hand clutched the heavy black staff like a claw. "I did not give you leave to go," said Gandalf sternly. "I have not finished. You have become a fool, Saruman, and yet pitiable. You might still have turned away from folly and evil and have been of service. But you chose to stay and gnaw the ends of your old plots. Stay then. But I warn you, you will not easily come out again, not unless the dark hands of the East stretch out to take you." "Saruman," he cried, and his voice grew in power and authority. "Behold, I am not Gandalf the Grey whom you betrayed. I am Gandalf the White, who has returned from death. You have no color now, and I cast you from the Order and from the Council." He raised his hand and spoke slowly in a clear, cold voice. "Saruman, your staff is broken." There was a crack, and the staff split asunder in Saruman's hand, and the head of it fell down at Gandalf's feet. "Go," said Gandalf. With a cry, Saruman fell back and crawled away. At that moment, a heavy shining thing came hurtling down from above. It glanced off the iron rail even as Saruman left it, and passing close to Gandalf's head, it smote the stair on which he stood. The rail rang and snapped. The stair cracked and splintered in glittering sparks. But the ball was unharmed. It rolled on down the steps, a globe of crystal, dark, but glowing with a heart of fire. As it bounded away towards a pool, Pippin ran after it and picked it up. Okay, so that's, I think, as good a place as any to stop that. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let's get to the questions. So here is our first question. This one was submitted by the Oski Boski, who asks me, if Eonwe saw Sauron as Annatar, why didn't he warn the children of Iluvatar that he will use this form to trick everyone? So I can see where you would come to the conclusion that Eonwe saw Sauron as Annatar, but he did not. Nor would Eonwe have known what Sauron would do. Sauron did attempt to surrender to Eonwe after the War of Wrath, and it was said that he did put on a fair form, or rather a fair hue, as seen in this following passage from the Silmarillion. When Thangorodrim was broken and Morgoth overthrown, Sauron put on his fair hue again and did obeisance of Eonwe, the herald of Manwë, and abjured all his evil deeds. And some hold that this was not at first falsely done, but that Sauron in truth repented, if only out of fear, being dismayed by the fall of Morgoth and the great wrath of the Lords of the West. But it was not within the power of Eonwe to pardon those of his own order, and he commanded Sauron to return to Aemon, and therefore receive the judgment of Manwë. Then Sauron was ashamed, and he was unwilling to return in humiliation and to receive from the Valar a sentence, it might be of long servitude in proof of his good faith. For under Morgoth his powers had been great. Therefore when Eonwe departed, he hid himself in Middle-earth, and he fell back into evil, for the bonds that Morgoth had laid upon him were very strong. So, note the exact words. Sauron put on his fair hue again. This likely refers to the original fair form that he took up in the Void when all of the Ainur took shape and hue as after the children of Iluvatar. And the usage of the word hue rather than form also points to this, as well as the word again. It would have been a form also that Eonwe would recognize. It would be familiar to him. He would know who that was just by looking at him. He would know him as Maiar. So Sauron was not even being deceptive, as noted here. At this point, he actually was repenting, although even it was out of fear. Sauron was a shapeshifter. He could appear, as whomever or whatever he wished. We can't and we shouldn't assume that his guise as Annatar was the same as the form that he showed to Eonwe. In fact, it would have been an extremely foolish move for Sauron to not craft an entirely new appearance for Annatar. Furthermore, Eonwe returned to Aemon shortly after this, and he was not around in Middle-earth when Sauron took up his Annatar guise, which was 1,200 years later. So it's not like he could have, warned anybody about Sauron's form, or that he would have recognized it at all. Okay, next question. This one was asked by Elizabeth McDougall, who said, "Is it ever explained what the Stone of Erech is? What is it made of, and why was it significant enough for Isildur to make the Oathbreaker swear upon it?" So the Stone of Erech, of course, that's a stone where the oath of the men of Dunharrow swore. They broke the oath. They became the dead men of Dunharrow, most commonly referred to by fans as the Dead Army in The Lord of the Rings. The exact origin is a little bit murky, but one important thing to know is that it's not that they swore upon the stone, they swore at the stone. It was an important place, a meeting point, but the stone didn't confer special powers to the oath. It was just the location. What they were swearing upon was Iluvatar, was God. So the original intention of Tolkien with the Stone of Erech was that it was going to be a Palantir. It was a very large Palantir, because they did vary in size. And I believe, actually, I'll talk a little bit about that later, because I think I have a Palantir question in here as well. It was brought from Numenor as an heirloom, and it seems that in this early stage of writing, the Palantir were all from Numenor. They were not of Aemon, and when later on they were said to be of Aemon, likely made by Feanor, the idea of the Stone of Erech being a Palantir was dropped. So with the stone being black and fully round and smooth, it's possible that it was a meteorite, that it was burned smooth by its descent into Arda, and it might have landed in Numenor. But of course, this is conjecture. The stone seems to be significant mostly as an heirloom of Numenor that was brought to Middle-earth by Isildur, and he made it an important meeting place. If in fact it was natural rock from Numenor, and not a meteorite, making oaths at it and an actual piece of the lost continent, Isildur's heritage, would have a heavy cultural weight to it, which is why Isildur used Erech and its stone as an important place for meetings. Numenor using places that were culturally significant for oaths and pacts is also seen in the creation of Rohan, where the pact that established the creation of the country, Gondor ceding part of their land to the Eotheod, which became the later Rohirrim, it happened at Elendil's grave, which was not known to people to even exist, that most people thought Elendil had no grave. So the power of the oath, of course, was not the stone itself, but the oath made to Iluvatar. And Iluvatar takes these sorts of promises, oaths, very seriously. So he held the men of Dunharrow to their oath. They could not pass from Arda until they fulfilled their oath. And the fact that they were able to depart after assisting Aragorn was one of the many indicators that he was, in fact, the true king. Okay. Next question. This one was anonymously submitted. How did Elrond and Cirdan know that Isildur took the One Ring from Sauron's finger? Both Elrond and Cirdan were there at the time. Elrond even spoke to Isildur about the ring. Elrond recalls the tale of Sauron's downfall and how Isildur came to the One Ring, as we can see in the passage I'm about to read, with a brief interruption from Boromir. I was the herald of Gil-galad and marched with his host. I was at the battle of Dagorlad, before the Black Gate of Mordor, when we had a mastery. For the spear of Gil-galad and the sword of Elendil, Aeglos and Narsil none could withstand. I beheld the last combat on the slopes of Orodruin, where Gil-galad died, and Elendil fell, and Narsil broke beneath him. But Sauron himself was overthrown, and Isildur cut the ring from his hand, with the hilt shard of his father's sword, and took it for his own. At this the stranger, Boromir, broke in. So that is what became of the ring, he cried. It was ever such a tale as told in the south. It has long been forgotten. I have heard of the great ring of him that we do not name, but we believe that it perished from the world in the ruin of his first realm. Isildur took it. That is tidings indeed. Alas, yes, said Elrond. Isildur took it, as should not have been. It should have been cast into Orodruin's fire nigh at hand where it was made. But few marked what Isildur did. He alone stood by his father in that last mortal contest, and by Gil-galad only Círdan stood, and I. But Isildur would not listen to our counsel. This I will have as Weirgild for my father and my brother, he said, and therefore, whether we would or no, he took it to treasure it. But soon he was betrayed by it to his death, and so it is named in the north Isildur's Bane. Yet death maybe was better than what else might have befallen him. So Elrond was there, and he even advised Isildur to destroy the ring, even stating that Orodruin, which was right there, was a great place to do it, and he could do it right now. He also mentions that Círdan was nearby as well, though tending to Gil-galad, who died from his burns. And if you could just give me one moment, because I noticed that there is a little bit of an error here that I have to fix on Quora. Oh. Why is that not working the way that it should? Maybe if I just do it like this. There we go, that fixed it. Okay. Sorry, I just noticed something very strange with the formatting there. Okay, next question. This one came from John Thompson, and he asked, were the Ents and the Eagles counted among the free peoples of Middle-earth? It's an interesting question, and I think that the main question here is, are they people in that sense? Free peoples is not an extremely restrictive categorization. It's not like saying children of Ilúvatar, which would be the elves and the men. And presumably hobbits as well, because they are essentially men. They are essentially human. They're an offshoot of the race of men. Dwarves are not children of Ilúvatar. They're children of Aule, if anything. And after the second music, they will be children of Ilúvatar, but they are absolutely still people. They are counted amongst the free people. The free people are any people who are not under Sauron's dominion, and they actively oppose him. This being said, the very insular Ents may have opposed Saruman, though that was out of revenge and to protect their own territory. We don't hear of them opposing Sauron. Eagles will opportunistically hunt orcs, and we learn from some of Tolkien's other writings that this is one of their chief functions, that they are the enemy of orcs. Orcs are beholden to Morgoth, and then later Sauron, but the great eagles are beholden to Manwë. Are they people? I would say not, despite the fact that they can speak. They are still birds. They are agents of Manwë, but they're not people. So I would not say that the Ents count as free peoples for the reason they may count as people. I'm not sure, but they certainly don't oppose Sauron openly. Okay, next question. This one's also anonymous. How many Palantiri are there in Middle-earth, and who all owns them? I know that Saruman and Denethor have one, but who else does? So this is what I was talking about. We do have a Palantir question here, and they do vary in size, and I'll mention the ones that are very big. There were a total of 8 known Palantir, though only 7 of those were in Middle-earth. The Palantir were created in Aman by an elvish smith. It was likely Feanor. We don't know for sure, but that seems to be what Gandalf thought, at least. And 7 of them found their way to Númenor and eventually Middle-earth. It is unknown how many of them still remain in Aman, though there is a master stone that is in Erech. That's the 8th that we know of. Of the 7 stones that exist in Middle-earth, we have, I'm going to go through them, the Anor stone. So the Anor stone was kept in Minas Anor, which was later called Minas Tirith. This is the one that Denethor used. It was damaged in his pyre, and for a very long time, anybody who looked into it, who did not possess great power, foresight, would only see Denethor's burning hands. So it was damaged. The next one is the Ithil stone, which was in Minas Ithil, which later became Minas Morgul. It was believed to have been lost or destroyed after the fall of Minas Ithil, but it was recovered by Sauron. So that's the one that Sauron had. The Orthanc stone, this is the one that was in Isengard, and it was used by Saruman. Later, Aragorn kept that one. Then there was the Osgiliath stone. This was in Osgiliath, which was the historical capital of Gondor. This one was very large, too large for one man to carry, for example. In the destruction of Osgiliath, it was said to have sunk to the bottom of the Anduin River, so that's out of people's reach. Then there was the Elostrian stone. Elendil placed this in a tower in Lindon. This is the first one that we're talking about that's in the north. Lindon is a country to the west of the Shire, where elves live. Círdan is in charge of that area. And Círdan used the Elostrian stone to contact the Undying Lands because there was a stone, the Master Stone in Erech. The Elostrian stone is unique because it didn't communicate with any of the other stones in Middle-earth. It wasn't attuned to them. It was attuned only to the Master Stone in Tol Erech. Then there was the Aemon Sul stone. This was another very large one, like the one in Osgiliath, and it was at Aemon Sul in Lord of the Rings, in the Fellowship of the Ring. We know this place as Weathertop. It was removed when the Witch King's armies were taking over that whole area, and Aemon Sul was destroyed. It was put on a ship, but then that ship sank. And then finally we have the Anaminas stone, and this was another one from the north. It was in the city of Anaminas, and it also was on that same ship that sunk. So those two were beyond our reach. Okay. All right, next question. This one is asked by the Oski Boski. Was Melkor always evil? Well, to quote Elrond, nothing is evil in the beginning. None of Iluvatar's creations were created to be evil. The very concept of evil didn't even exist until Melkor created it. Now, it is true that in doing so, in putting his own dark ambitions and thoughts into the Ainulindale, the music of the Ainur, Melkor was also, in a way, doing Iluvatar's will, as stated by Iluvatar himself, and I'm going to read you the relevant passage from the Silmarillion. Then Iluvatar spoke, and he said, "Mighty are the Ainur, and mightiest among them is Melkor. But that he may know, and all the Ainur, that I am Iluvatar, those things that ye have sung, I will show them forth, and ye may see what ye have done. And thou, Melkor, shall see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful which he himself hath not imagined." Then the Ainur were afraid, and they did not yet comprehend the words that were said to them, and Melkor was filled with shame, of which came secret anger. But Iluvatar arose in splendor, and he went forth from the fair regions that he had made for the Ainur, and the Ainur followed him. So Iluvatar has seen the end of the vision of Ea, while the Ainur were shielded from seeing it. He knows how it all ends. He knows that Melkor loses. He has seen that evil gives meaning to good. Danger creates courage. Darkness makes us appreciate light, and so on. Melkor is told straight up that there is nothing that he can do to mar the beauty of Iluvatar's creation in any way that matters. And anything that he does in his attempts are only going to lead to greater beauty that he cannot understand. Even now, Melkor wasn't evil, but he was ambitious. He wished to make things of his own. He was impatient. He wanted the secret fire. Melkor had free will, as all the Ainur did, and he chose to rail against Iluvatar's plan, but he failed to understand that he was part of the plan. Iluvatar did not create Melkor to be a foe, but Iluvatar can see the past, the present, the future. He knows what will happen. He knows the end. He knows the outcome. It doesn't matter to him what Melkor does. Okay. All right, next question. This was submitted by Dave Sanders, and Dave asks, how is it that elves are able to defeat Maiar? I'm assuming you're referring to Sauron and the Balrogs. Elves are not as mighty as the Ainur, but there is more to conflict than might. Glorfindel and Ecthelion have defeated Balrogs, who are Maiar spirits, but they also died. So you could say that these Balrogs defeated them as well. In the case of Sauron, we see an instance where he was defeated by Luthien and Huan. Huan had an unusual property. Magic didn't work on him, so that's a lot of Sauron's tricks just right out the window. And Luthien herself was the daughter of a Maia. She was no ordinary elf. Being greater in might doesn't mean that you win every time. There's a lot more to it than that, and the stories of heroes defeating enemies that are much greater than them in might is not something that Tolkien invented. It's been around forever. Just look at Beowulf, or look at David and Goliath. Okay, next question. This one was anonymous. Since the Ainur are known to pair up, who was Sauron's love interest? So, some Ainur are known to pair up and marry each other. It's not the rule, really. The ones that we hear about are mainly the Valar. And even then, not all of the Valar did pair up. Of the original 14 Valar that descended into Arda, there were 7 men and 7 women. So it seems like very, very equal there. They could all pair up. Nobody's alone, right? But that's not how it worked. That's not how it worked out, because out of those 14, there were 4 of them that did not pair off and get married. There was Nienna, Ulmo, Melkor, and Nessa. Now, then they were joined by a 15th Valar. That was Tulkas, and Tulkas did wind up marrying Nessa. But then we still had Nienna, Ulmo, and Melkor, who were unattached. Melkor did have a love interest. He was interested in Varda, but she was in love with his brother Manwe, and she did not like Melkor. She saw the darkness in his heart. Melkor is a Vala by creation, but he was cast out of their order forevermore. So this leaves Nienna and Ulmo. They were content to live alone, as said by Tolkien. They showed no interest in marriage or romance. Out of the Maya, we know the names of far less of them. We get hints that Tilion loves Arian. We don't know for sure, but it's alluded to in the text, we'll say. Melian, of course, fell in love, but not with another Ainu. She fell in love with an elf, Iluthingol. And you can stretch interpretation of the text enough to maybe wonder if Eonwe and Ilmare were a couple. And then, of course, there was Ose and Uinen. They were married. But beyond this, Tolkien did not write about Maiar romance. Sauron, as it were, never seemed to have any specific interest in romance, same as the Balrogs, the Istari, and then Salmar. There are many other Maiar who were unnamed. They are Ainur, just as the Valar are, and we can assume they are fully capable of love, but some, like Nienna and Ulmo, just aren't interested. And I think that Sauron is likely in their number. Sauron did not really have very many female companions other than Turingwithil, and she was a very minor character that was only mentioned to be his messenger, so there was probably nothing romantic there. Okay, next question. This one is anonymous. Did Saruman invent gunpowder in Middle-earth? Possibly. Tolkien makes reference to the Fire of Orthanc, which destroys a wall at the Hornburg during the Battle of Helm's Deep, and we are to understand that a similar device was used against the Ents when they attacked Orthanc that led to the death of Beachbone. So what was the Fire of Orthanc? We don't get much of an explanation other than that it seemingly was chemical in nature, an explosive compound used by Saruman, and theorized to have been created by him. It could have been gunpowder, or at least something like gunpowder, or it could have contained gunpowder, or at least it could have contained niter. That I think that it's likely to at least be similar to gunpowder or niter. because it was described by Aragorn as a blasting fire. It should be mentioned that whatever it is, it may not have even been Saruman's sole invention. We believe that it probably was, but it might not have been. Sauron's forces did use something similar during the siege of Barad-dûr, which was far earlier. So, and that blowed. Not the siege of Barad-dûr. That's incorrect. Minas Tirith, which was not far earlier, but Sauron did use something like that to blow open the Ramas Ekor. So it's very possible that Saruman came up with it, or it's also very possible that Sauron came up with it. And it's also possible that they both independently came up with it, you know. And that's, I think that when it comes to invention, it's often like that people come to the same conclusion independently at around the same time. Okay. Next question. This one's anonymous. What weapons did Sauron use? This is the one from the thumbnail. What were Sauron's weapons? So, Sauron was not big on weapons. He didn't really use weapons. Sauron was a necromancer. He was a sorcerer. And his main offensive abilities were magical, not physical. In the few instances in which he did fight physically, no weapons are mentioned other than his hands, his bare hands, which could burn as hot as fire. This was the method by which Gil-galad and Elendil were killed. In previous face-offs, he used magic or song, which to the Ainur are synonymous, such as against Huan or Finrod. Finrod took him on in a battle of song and lost, while Huan was pretty much immune to magic, so he clamped down on Sauron with his jaws, and Sauron could not escape, forcing him to yield to Luthien. Sauron isn't a big fighter. He was Morgoth's strategist, his torturer, his spy master, his scientist/sorcerer. So on his own, he only took to direct combat in great desperation. He wasn't really a fighter. Okay, next question is from Alice Stone. What is the most important lesson reading Tolkien has taught you? I think what it taught me the most was in relation to world building and the restraint upon overdoing it to a certain extent. Tolkien built a rather fascinating world, even in just The Hobbit, but it was The Lord of the Rings that really captured my imagination. Even though it was a fairy story in a fantastical world, it still felt real. Different parts of the world had different cultures and norms and languages, and it was all very fleshed out. Tolkien once lamented the great effort to which he was forced to undergo after publishing the book. His world was so fleshed out that it became common for people to assume that he knew every detail about his world, and they asked him a great number of questions. Botanists wanted to know about plants, architects wanted to know about buildings, economists wanted to know about money, and so on. It amused him. He called it a vast game, but at the same time, it frustrated him that he could not provide everything that they wanted to know. The appendices, in their truncated form, were not going to satisfy everyone. It wouldn't even satisfy him. And a true book of Lord of Arda would be long. It would be as long as Fellowship of the Ring, probably. That being said, we don't know everything about Arda, and that's by design. There are some things that Tolkien would not answer. He would just say, I don't know. Maybe he might give you like, oh, well, I guess it might have been this, but it was never anything very sure when it came to those things. He did admit, of course, that he did this to create some mystery. We don't know everything about our own world, so how can we expect to know everything about a fictional world? So in writing, the lesson, of course, is to allow some room for mystery, but also in life, it's important to be at peace with what you don't know. Just because you don't know an answer to a question doesn't mean there isn't an answer to that question. It's just something that you don't know, and maybe you can't know. Maybe there are things that we will just not know in our lifetimes, and that's fine. That's okay. And you could apply this to a great number of things, I think, just about anything. Tolkien's thoughts on true wisdom seem to be acknowledgement of the unknown. I'm going to give an example from the work of The Lord of the Rings is Gandalf. at the Council of Elrond nixed the idea of tossing the One Ring into the sea, simply because the fate of the One Ring would be a mystery. It would be a question mark. The seas change, lands change. It may resurface at some point in the future, and the sea is full of mysteries. There are creatures down there, and we don't know the nature of all those creatures. Okay, next question. This is from Jason Habitler, who asks, how long after Isildur took Sauron's ring did he live? This is a very quick answer, but I want to get into a little bit of the comments here, because it's pretty funny. Since Isildur taking the One Ring, it was the event that sort of kick-started the Third Age. We can surmise how many years he lived, how much longer he lived, just by the date of his death. He died in the year 2 of the Third Age at the disaster of the Gladden Field. So Isildur lived 2 years after taking the One. He was slain by orcs at Gladden Fields. He was 234 years old at the time. Now, I had a rather bizarre a rather bizarre conversation with somebody named Kieran, who asked, well, what, don't they start at year 1? Wouldn't it have been 1 year later rather than 2? And I didn't understand at first what he meant, because I'm like, what are you talking about? I said, I didn't say they start at 2. I said he died in the year 2, which is 2 years after he got the ring. And then he said, no, I'm not saying that it started in the year 2. I'm saying that, we start at the year 1. So the year 2 is 1 year later. And I'm like, but it's 2 years after he got the ring. It's not 2 years after the year 1. It's 2 years after he got the ring. He got the ring in 3441 of the Second Age. So eventually I was able to make Kieran understand this, but it was a very, very amusing conversation. Okay, so next question. This one's anonymous. Did the Eagles in Tolkien's universe have the ability to travel to Valinor to bring news of Middle-earth after the fall of Numenor, or was there a different way of communicating with Manwe? Man, this is a good one. Tolkien's original idea for the Eagles were that they were Maiar spirits in the form of birds, sort of like the Balrogs are Maiar spirits in the form of, I guess you would say, grotesque demons. In the early Silmarillion, Tolkien spoke of spirits in the shape of hawks and eagles. This early draft also included any intelligent animal being a Maiar, such as Huan, for example. Now, later on, Tolkien changed his mind about this, and he decided they aren't just animals, they're just of a higher order of animals that could speak and had intelligence. So the reason for this change was in no small part was because the eagles had descendants. The Ainur typically don't have descendants. The exception is Melian. Now, her exception is possibly only due to the fact that her husband was not Ainur. He was elf. So we could theorize that to have children, or at least one of the pairing, must be a child of Iluvatar. And because we never hear of like Varda and Manwe having children, or Uinen and Eonwe having children. It's just not something that's spoken of. I don't think that the Ainur can reproduce in that fashion. So we can theorize this, right? But it does lead to a lot of strange thoughts and strange questions, and this is why I think this is such a good this is such a good topic, which I'm going to have to delve into some greater detail at some point. I think that Tolkien and most people, most sane people, most normal people would be horrified at the thought of an eagle and an elf copulating, or an eagle and a man copulating. And I think that if you were to say, well, maybe they mated with regular eagles, like non-intelligent birds, and that's even weirder, because it's something with human intelligence mating with an animal. It's just strange. Now we hear about Ungoliant and spiders, but this is something, Ungoliant's evil. You kind of expect that kind of sick sort of perversion of nature from a creature like Ungoliant. You would not expect it from Manwe's creations like the eagles. So if they were indeed Manwe's creations and not Maiar themselves. So it leads to some weird thoughts. It leads to some strange questions. How do the eagles even reproduce if they are Ainur, right? And if they are not Ainu, well, what is the answer to your question? So he changed it so that they were animals. They were just a high order of animals that could speak and that could understand human speech. And we see a little bit of this in The Hobbit, where there are just birds that can talk. Now, the great eagles, they're not immortal. They're not Ainur. They cannot traverse the straight path to Aemon. So communication with Manwë had to be initiated by him in some way. Now, the exact device of this is unknown. He might have sent a Maiar messenger to speak with Thorondor or Gwaihir. Thorondor didn't seem to be around. We don't really know what happened to him, but you didn't hear about him after the first age. So probably Gwaihir. He might appear himself in Middle-earth like Ulmo did, although probably not, right? Probably not. Or maybe he had some sort of special long-distance communication, such as the Palantir. Maybe they had an intermediary like Círdan. Who knows? Personally, I think the whole messenger idea is probably the most likely. But none of that's set in stone, because Tolkien changed his mind again. He once again entertained the thought of the eagles being Maiar spirits. So here's some text. I'm going to read you a very brief snippet of the nature of Middle-earth. The most notable were those Maiar who took the form of the mighty speaking eagles that we hear of in the legends of the war of the Noldor against Melkor, and who remained in the west of Middle-earth until the fall of Sauron and the dominion of men, after which they were not heard of again. Their intervention in the story of Maelor, in the duel of Fingolfin and Melkor, in the rescue of Beren and Luthien is well known. Beyond their knowledge were the deeds of the eagles in the war against Sauron, in the rescue of the Ring Finder and his companions in the Battle of Five Armies, and in the rescue of the Ring Bearer from the fires of Mount Doom. So this was very late information. He wrote this in 1970, and it wasn't published until 2021. That was just 2 years ago. So we once again must entertain the thought that eagles might be angelic in nature. Therefore, they could traverse the straight path and go to the Undying Lands and speak with Manwë directly. The method of their reproduction is still an open question, and this is something that I would like to take a deep dive into at one point, because I think it bears thought. It's possible that they may not reproduce, but that would contradict some of the text, such as Gwaihir being a descendant or possibly a son of Thorondor. There might be generations between them, we're not really sure on that, but he was definitely a descendant of some form. And Gwaihir has been around since the First Age. So it all depends on whether you consider the eagles to be spirits or animals, which is something that Tolkien wavered on. He changed his mind twice. Okay, next question. How is Ungoliant so powerful? So this was asked by Jay Chef. I'm sorry. Jay actually asked me this question directly on Twitch, actually. I was streaming, and he asked me about it. And he said, I have a question for you that I'm going to post at Quora, if you don't mind. And I said, oh, well, what is it? Do post it, but I was wondering what it was. And I did answer him on Twitch, but I also wanted to write out an answer for Quora and also feature it in a YouTube video. So the question is, how is Ungoliant so powerful? So Ungoliant seems almost impossibly powerful in that scene where she confronts Morgoth in the place that would later be called Lammoth, which was named after Morgoth's echoing cry. However, it isn't about Ungoliant being generally more powerful than Morgoth, but more powerful just in that moment. So I'm going to read the relevant text from the Silmarillion. I'm going to add a little bit of emphasis to the parts that I think are very relevant. Blackheart, she said, I have done thy bidding, but I hunger still. What wouldst thou have more? Said Morgoth. Dost thou desire all the world for thy belly? I did not vow to give thee that. I am its lord. Not so much, said Ungoliant. But thou hast a great treasure from Formanus. I will have all that, yea, and with both hands thou shalt give it. Then perforce Morgoth surrendered to her the gems that he bore with him, one by one and grudgingly, and she devoured them, and their beauty perished from the world. Huger and darker yet grew Ungoliant, but her lust was unsated. With one hand thou givest, she said, yet the left only. Open thy right hand. In his right hand Morgoth held close the Silmarils, and though they were locked in a crystal casket, they had begun to burn him, and his hand was clenched in pain. But he would not open it. Nay, he said, thou hast had thy due. For with my power that I put into thee, thy work was accomplished. I need thee no more. These things thou shalt not have nor see. I name them unto myself forever. But Ungoliant had grown great, and he less by the power that had gone out of him. And she rose against him, and her cloud closed about him, and she enmeshed him in a web of clinging thongs to strangle him. And it goes on. But those are the relevant parts. So the emphasis is important here. Ungoliant had grown greater by the power that Morgoth had put into her, by consuming the gems of Formenos, and also from drinking the light of the two trees of Valinor, while Morgoth had grown lesser by putting his power into Ungoliant, attacking the trees and the flight across the Helcaraxe. So Morgoth was diminished, and Ungoliant had grown large and powerful. She was still overcome by the Balrogs and forced to flee, so it was less that she was greater than Morgoth in that scene, but that she opportunistically attacked a weakened rival. Okay, next question. This one's from Matthew Heath. In Tolkien's world, a creator diminishes their innate power. So this is relevant, we were just talking about this. By putting it into the things that they create. Why, of all the Valar, did only Melkor, Morgoth, diminish to the extent he did? Now, this is a good question. All of the Valar were responsible for the creation of Ea and Arda. Not just the Valar, but the Ainur, all of the Ainur, the Maiar as well. And why was Melkor the only one that was diminished in this fashion and so much? All of the Valar, all of the Ainur had their parts to play, but Melkor did more than his part. He was the greatest in might. He wanted the greatest mastery over the world. In the absence of Iluvatar himself, he wished to be the Lord of all Arda. So he put much more of himself into the planet than he was expected to. This is the concept of Morgoth's ring. If you look at the original idea of Middle-earth, it was even ring-shaped, Middle-earth. It was a vast circular continent with a sea, or an inner sea, or a large lake in the middle, and then in the center of that, an island, and that's where the Valar dwelt. And this is nothing like the shape of Middle-earth that we're familiar with because of the War of the Valar, because of Melkor changing things and them trying to fix it and going back and forth like that. No Valar put more of themselves into the world than Melkor did. And he didn't just put it into the world, he also created armies, and it wasn't just about like creating a ring or a gem or like this. He was creating orcs and dragons and trolls and vast armies and evil, and he was constantly working on all this. So he put his power into Ungoliant, as we saw in that last reading I did. So yeah, he put himself fully into the planet, and that's why Arda is Morgoth's ring. Okay, next question. This one's from Sting. Okay, so Sting asks, who was the mightiest elf during the Third Age in terms of combat? In terms of combat, it would be Glorfindel. He's a minor character in The Lord of the Rings. He was already one of the mightiest elves of the First Age. He was Lord of the Golden Flower of Gondolin. He was one of the few characters who was said to have slain a Balrog, and unlike the others, he wasn't greatly hurt in the battle itself. He was still killed, but it wasn't because the Balrog was damaging him so much. It's because after he finally killed the Balrog, as it fell into a ravine, it grabbed him by the hair. Kind of very similar, if you think about it, to what happened to Gandalf. Although their fight continued onwards for another 11 days. In this case, it ended there. The greatest warriors had mostly passed, the greatest warriors of elves at least, had mostly passed into the Undying Lands. Glorfindel alone came back to assist Lord Elrond. Glorfindel was one of the few Eldar who had seen the light of the two trees of Valinor, who was left in Middle-earth in the Third Age. He was in the illustrious company of elves like Galadriel, possibly Celeborn. There's a few different origins for him. We're not sure exactly which one to go with. He might be from Aemon, he might be from Doriath. Personally, I would say he's from Doriath. And Gildor and Glorian, who's a very minor character as well. Even the very oldest and wisest elves of Middle-earth, such as Elrond, Cirdan, they were what we would say is Morquendi. They did not see the light of the two trees. Cirdan never made it to Aemon. He tried to get there, but things kept coming up, and Elrond was born in Middle-earth. So they weren't, even speaking of these guys, they weren't warriors. They were known to fight, of course, and I'm sure that Elrond and Cirdan were very good in battle, but they weren't known as warriors amongst the elves like Glorfindel was. They didn't kill any Balrogs, so there's Gildor as well. We don't really know much about Gildor and Glorian. He's a very interesting character, but there's like nothing there about him. We know he's related to, I believe, Finrod, but he could be a great warrior, but we don't ever hear about it. The same thing with Eristor. We don't know anything about Eristor. He was just some guy that was at the Council of Elrond, so we don't know who he is either. Okay. Here's another one from Sting. Could Thorondor defeat Smaug? Yeah, probably. Not probably, definitely. One of Tolkien's themes that we see in his Legendarium is diminishment. Things diminish over time. The elves leave, the elves fade, the Valar become less involved, the wizards lose their power, they go home, magic slowly fades in the world, the race of men come into power, conflicts grow smaller in scale. Smaug is a big threat in the Third Age, but he was still killed with a single arrow. And that could have happened to any dragon, but he thought himself invincible because of his armored belly, so he was flying in a very careless fashion. He wasn't protecting his belly. In the First Age, the dragons, they were bigger, they were nastier, they were more careful too. The first and greatest of the winged dragons was Ancalagon the Black, and he was destroyed after a day of battle with Earendil and the eagles, which of course would include Thorondor. Now, he, of course, had the help of other eagles and a very powerful elf who had a Silmaril with him, but Smaug is a much lesser foe. He's a spicy lizard compared to Ancalagon. So Thorondor also fought Morgoth, or I can't even say he fought Morgoth, he attacked Morgoth. Morgoth was not able to fight back. Thorondor got in, attacked, and he got away unscathed. He stopped the Dark Lord from desecrating the remains of Fingolfin. Thorondor would probably spot Smaug's weakness from a mile away. There's a reason they say eagle-eyed, right? And he would go right for that. Smaug wouldn't even know what hit him. Okay, final question. This one was asked by Leo G. Leo asks, this is a can of worms. Here we go. What is a better series? The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, Game of Thrones, The Hunger Games, Harry Potter, or Narnia, and why? Also, what's the difference between each series, since most of them involve fantasy magic? So they're all very different. I don't feel comfortable including The Hunger Games in this comparison, and I'll tell you why. It's not really a fantasy series. It's not like the others. To answer the direct question, The Lord of the Rings, or rather the Tolkien Legendarium, is the best one out of the ones mentioned by pretty much every metric. It served as a big influence for later works like Harry Potter and A Song of Ice and Fire, which Game of Thrones is just one volume of A Song of Ice and Fire. This is my personal opinion, but it's also my professional opinion. It's also kind of an objective fact based on cultural impact and longevity. The Hunger Games isn't in the conversation because it's a dystopian science fiction story. It was based heavily on a film called Battle Royale, and I saw Battle Royale, hated it, so I never bothered with The Hunger Games because I didn't want something that was like Battle Royale. I hated Battle Royale. So, but I've seen enough of The Hunger Games to know that it's not really the same style of book as the rest. It's not anything like Lord of the Rings or Narnia or Song of Ice and Fire or Harry Potter. You might have a conversation about The Hunger Games being in the same category as like Star Wars, but not The Lord of the Rings. Now, I don't personally care for the Narnia books. I read some of them as a boy, and but they're the closest in style and quality to Tolkien's work. There's a lot of shameless allegory in there, and it beats you over the head with its message. The first book was quite good. It was quite tolerable, I thought. The second book, the Prince Caspian, it was all right. And this is my opinion, it was all right. I didn't like it as much as the first one. And then the third book, I used to call it Voyage of the Yawn Treader. I couldn't tolerate it. It was, I don't think I even finished it as a boy. So, Harry Potter, palatable upon first consumption, without the obvious allegories, obviously. It's got a relatable cast, it's got some accessibility. The world building's a mess. It's very seat-of-the-pants style writing, which I would say that J.K. Rowling is less like Tolkien and more like C.S. Lewis. Not as good as C.S. Lewis. Not as, you know, and like I said, I don't like Narnia, but he wrote a lot of other books as well. If she had left 7 books done and that was it, stop there, I might remember her work more fondly, but she went into the realm of really bad sanctioned fan fiction. There was a sequel play, there was a line of movies that acted as prequels that were very quickly deteriorated in quality. And then there was the endless lore dumps on social media that really didn't add anything other than random trivia. I think the moment that I realized that J.K. Rowling was completely out of her mind was when she made a tweet to announce that the wizards in her world used to evacuate their bowels wherever they walked and just use magic to get rid of the results. Because in her mind, having access to magic means a complete stagnation of technology to the point where you wouldn't even have a toilet until many hundreds of years after you should. A Song of Ice and Fire is a marvel of world building. I just don't care for the world that was built. It's crafted well. I would say it's crafted masterfully, with great care to continuity and internal consistency. It succeeds where Harry Potter fails, and also fails where Harry Potter succeeded, but it's just dreary and cynical, and it isn't to my personal taste. I also find the writing itself, the actual quality of the writing, and keep in mind, writing and world building are two different things. World building is about creating a world to tell a story, and writing is about telling the story itself, and the actual story doesn't interest me. I find it to be juvenile. George R.R. Martin's focus on realism is silly to me. It's fantasy. It's not meant to be realistic. If you want great fantasy stories that aren't Tolkien, perhaps the discussion should be more about something like The Wheel of Time, or the works of Neil Gaiman. Not the typical pop culture lodestones that were Hollywoodized, either in their inception or somewhere along the way. At least Hollywood and its audiences seem to agree with me that 3 was enough when it came to Narnia. Okay, so that's all of the questions we have for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, click the like button, leave me some comments, and when you subscribe, I know it's a pain in the butt. You think, subscribe, that's it, right? It doesn't work that way anymore. You have to hit a bell, you have to hit yes to notifications. It's a whole thing, but please do that. Please support the channel, and we'll continue to bring you more. Send me some questions on Quora. The link is in the description, and we'll see you guys next week.